Rancher saves dying girl from blizzard. But not knowing she owned half state, the morning had started quietly on Jack Thompson's ranch, the kind of quiet that only came in the deep heart of winter. Montana's mountains were covered in thick blankets of snow, and the sun had barely begun to peek over the distant peaks, casting a soft golden light on the frozen landscape. Jack loved mornings like this, when the air was sharp and clean and the snow crunched beneath his boots. He had lived on the ranch all his life. He knew every ridge, every valley, and every path that led through the mountains. His life was simple but honest, filled with hard work and respect for the land he called home. That morning, Jack had set out earlier than usual. He needed to check on his cattle who were grazing on the lower slopes. Winter had been especially harsh that year. The snow had piled up higher than anyone could remember, and temperatures had dropped lower than ever before. Jack had spent the previous night worrying about the animals, and now, as he rode his old pickup truck along the frozen trails, he felt a mixture of routine and unease. There was something about the snow that felt different today, almost alive, as if it carried a warning that something was about to happen. The wind was strong, whipping snowflakes into the cab of his truck and blinding him at times. Visibility was poor, and the mountains seemed to shift and change with every gust. Jack had learned long ago to trust his instincts in such weather. He slowed the truck as he neared a narrow pass where the trail curved sharply between two rocky cliffs. That's when he noticed it. An unusual pattern in the snow. A series of small disturbances that didn't match the tracks of his cattle or any animal he knew. His heart skipped a beat. Something or someone had been here recently. Jack parked the truck and grabbed his coat, hat, and gloves, bracing himself against the cold. He stepped into the snow, the white powder crunching under his boots, and began to follow the tracks. As he moved carefully along the edge of the trail, he saw something that made him stop completely. There, partially buried in snow and ice, was a figure. A young girl, barely conscious, shivering violently. She was lying face down, her arms stiff, and her small body trembling from the cold. Jack's heart sank. He had seen many things in his life on the ranch, but this was different. This was a human life hanging by a thread. Without thinking, Jack rushed to her side. He gently rolled her over, careful not to jolt her too much. Her cheeks were pale, her lips blue, and her eyes fluttered weakly. Hey, you're going to be okay," he said softly, trying to calm her. The girl barely responded, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Jack realized the danger immediately. She was suffering from severe hypothermia, and if he didn't act fast, she could die right there in the snow. His mind raced. He had a blanket in his truck, and he could carry her back. But the wind was fierce and the snow was deep. Every second counted. Jack wrapped the girl carefully in his thick wool blanket, lifting her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, and he felt the frailty of her body. As he carried her back to the truck, he murmured words of encouragement, hoping she could hear him over the howling wind. The snow was relentless, and each step was a struggle. His boots sank into the drifts, and he had to fight the icy gusts that threatened to push him off balance. He imagined what would happen if he slipped or fell, but he didn't allow fear to stop him. Saving her life mattered more than anything else. Once he reached the truck, Jack helped her inside, quickly starting the engine to warm the cab. He pulled off his own coat to cover her, and the heat from the heater slowly began to reach her frozen skin. Her breathing was shallow, and Jack could see the worry in her eyes as she struggled to focus. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I've got you. Just hang on, okay?" She nodded weakly, barely able to speak, and her eyes closed as exhaustion and cold overtook her. Jack's mind was focused, his body tense with urgency. He knew he had to get her to the hospital as fast as possible. The drive down the mountain was treacherous. Snow continued to fall heavily, covering the road and making it almost impossible to see. Jack had driven these trails countless times, but today he had to navigate them while carrying someone's life in his hands. He slowed the truck when necessary, avoiding sharp rocks and icy patches, all the while talking to the girl, keeping her conscious, trying to keep her spirits up. "Almost there," he whispered, even though he didn't know if she could hear him. Every mile was a battle against time and nature, but Jack's determination never wavered. As they neared the valley, Jack's thoughts drifted for a moment. He didn't know who this girl was. She hadn't said much, only whispered a name that he'd barely caught. For all he knew, she could have been someone from the nearby town, or just a traveler lost in the snow. He didn't care about that. Right now, all that mattered was getting her to safety. In his heart, Jack felt a responsibility, a calling that went beyond ranching or his own comfort. He was a man shaped by the mountains, by hard work, and by the value of life. This was a test of everything he had learned. Finally, he reached the small hospital at the edge of town. The building looked warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the frozen wilderness outside. Jack ran inside, carrying the girl, and shouted for help. Nurses and doctors rushed to meet him, taking her from his arms and quickly assessing her condition. Jack watched anxiously as they worked, feeling a mix of relief and worry. He knew he had done everything he could, but the next steps were out of his hands. He had saved her from the blizzard, but the battle was not over. As he waited, Jack learned from the doctors just how close the girl had been to death. They explained that the cold she had endured could have stopped her heart at any moment. The way he had acted, finding her quickly, keeping her warm, and getting her to the hospital, had given her a fighting chance. Jack listened quietly, a humble sense of pride swelling in his chest, though he refused to think of it as heroism. He had simply done what anyone would do when faced with a life in danger. The hours passed slowly, and Jack stayed in the hospital lobby, watching the snowstorm rage outside. He thought about the mountains, about his cattle, about the quiet life he had lived all these years. He thought about the girl, her small, fragile body, and how a single decision, following his instincts, had changed the course of her life. He didn't know her, but in that moment she became important to him, not because of who she was, but because she was human, and every human life mattered. By the time night fell, the storm had eased slightly, though snow still fell in heavy sheets. The doctors came out to speak with him, their faces serious but hopeful. The girl was stable now, her body warming, her breathing steady. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done it. She was alive. And even though he didn't know her story, didn't know her family, or anything about her life, he felt a connection, a quiet understanding that sometimes life's most important moments were not about wealth or fame, but about courage, care, and the simple act of saving someone from harm. That night, as Jack drove back to his ranch under the soft glow of a snow-covered moon, he thought about the mountains, the cattle, and the endless sky above. He thought about the girl lying in a hospital bed somewhere, alive because of him. And he smiled quietly to himself, knowing that he had faced the storm and come through not just as a rancher, but as a man who had made a difference in someone's life, even if only for a moment. The blizzard had been fierce, but his determination had been stronger. And in that truth, he found something he had never expected. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that, sometimes, one person's courage could be enough to change everything. After the blizzard passed, the small hospital in the valley became the center of Emily Harper's world, though she barely remembered the terrifying moments before Jack Thompson had found her. The days in the hospital were long and quiet, filled with the soft beeping of machines, the shuffling of nurses, and the occasional low hum of the heating system trying to keep the winter chill out. Emily slowly began to regain warmth in her hands and feet, and with each passing hour the color returned to her pale cheeks. Yet even as her body healed, her mind was restless, full of questions she didn't yet have answers for. Jack visited every day. Despite his busy life on the ranch, he would drive down the snow-covered mountain roads, his old truck rattling with the cold, carrying small gifts, a warm scarf, a book to read, sometimes a cup of hot cocoa he insisted was the best in the valley. Emily, still fragile, would smile weakly when she saw him, comforted by his presence. He never demanded recognition or thanks. He only asked how she was feeling and whether she needed anything. That simple care was more than anyone had expected, and Emily felt a deep gratitude she struggled to put into words. The doctors had been amazed at her recovery. They explained that severe hypothermia, like the one she had suffered, often left lasting effects on the body. Numbness, joint pain, and fatigue were common, and it could take weeks before she could walk or speak without feeling drained. Emily had endured all of it, yet she remained remarkably resilient. She credited her survival to Jack, though she never said it aloud at first. Her gratitude simmered quietly in her heart, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. There was something about this man, so ordinary yet so extraordinary, who had risked everything to save her life. Emily's parents arrived after a few days, and Jack was introduced formally for the first time. He hadn't known who she was when he rescued her, and he had not asked. Her father, a stern but kind man, and her mother, gentle and careful, looked at Jack with awe and relief. They could not believe that their daughter had been found alive in the middle of a blizzard, and even more, that a humble rancher had been the one to save her. Emily watched quietly as her parents spoke with Jack, trying to find the words that could express her feelings. She wanted to tell him how much his courage had meant to her, but she found herself overwhelmed. Days turned into a week, and Emily began to recover more quickly than anyone expected. With Jack's encouragement and gentle insistence, she started walking around the hospital corridors, first with a nurse, then alone, leaning on walls and railings as she rebuilt her strength. The snow outside had melted into slush, and the mountain stood tall and quiet as if nothing had happened. Yet inside, a bond was forming between Emily and Jack, a silent understanding born from a life-altering moment in the storm. She had trusted him without knowing his name, without knowing anything about his life, and he had saved her without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, as Emily sat by the hospital window watching the sun sparkle on the remaining snow, she turned to Jack and asked a question that had been on her mind for days. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her, his face weathered and calm, and shrugged. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I just saw someone in trouble, and I did what I had to do." "It wasn't heroic. Anyone else would have done the same." Emily studied him carefully, trying to understand the simplicity of his words. To her, it seemed impossible that someone could act with such selflessness, without thought of reward or recognition. The days in the hospital allowed Emily to reflect on her own choices as well. She had been adventurous, often wandering into mountains alone, believing herself strong and careful. She realized how fragile life could be and how quickly things could change. Her parents, watching from the sidelines, were both relieved and furious. Relieved that she had survived, furious that she had put herself in danger. Jack's presence, however, reminded them that even in the worst of circumstances, human kindness could prevail. They had never met someone like him before. A man who had faced the storm, not for fame, not for money, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Emily began telling her story to the doctors and nurses, describing the blizzard, the snow, and how Jack had found her. Her voice grew stronger each day, and she smiled as she recalled the warmth of the blanket and the words Jack had whispered to keep her conscious. The hospital staff listened intently, amazed by the bond forming between the girl who had nearly frozen and the rancher who had saved her. News of the rescue spread quietly through the small town, and soon neighbors and friends came to visit, curious about the girl who had survived such a deadly storm and the man who had made it possible. Despite her gradual recovery, Emily remained humble. She had always been careful about her family's reputation and the wealth they held, yet she felt no need to reveal any of that to Jack. In her eyes, he had helped her because he was a good person, not because he was trying to earn favor. She watched him interact with the hospital staff and visitors, noticing how he treated everyone with the same quiet respect and patience. There was no arrogance, no hint of pride, just a steady presence that reassured everyone around him. Emily realized that courage often came in quiet, unnoticed ways, and that true heroism didn't always appear in headlines or awards. As the week drew to a close, Emily was allowed short walks outside, where the cold air was still sharp but less dangerous than during the storm. Jack accompanied her each time, helping her navigate the icy patches and ensuring she was safe. They walked through the snow-covered fields, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude and a growing admiration for the man who had risked everything to save her. She had always believed in the importance of wealth and power, but in those quiet moments with Jack, she understood something far more valuable: courage, compassion, and selflessness. During one walk, Emily finally asked another question that had been troubling her. "Did you ever worry you wouldn't make it?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. Jack looked down at her, smiling softly. "Of course," he admitted. "I've faced storms before, and some of them were close. But fear doesn't stop me from doing what's right." I can't leave someone to die if I can help it. You can't let fear control you when someone's life is on the line. Emily nodded, understanding that his bravery was not about being fearless, it was about doing the right thing despite fear. The bond between Emily and Jack grew stronger each day. She found herself confiding small details about her life, her love for the outdoors, and the adventures she had always sought. Jack listened patiently, offering advice and stories from his own life on the ranch. They laughed together over small things, the spilled cup of cocoa, the way her boots slipped on ice, the stubbornness of his old pickup truck. Though Emily had once seen herself as independent and self-sufficient, she now understood the importance of relying on others when life demanded it. Jack had shown her that courage and kindness often came from unexpected places. By the time Emily was ready to leave the hospital, she was walking with confidence, her face glowing with health and vitality. Jack accompanied her to the front doors, where her parents waited, relief and emotion written across their faces. Emily turned to Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude.
"Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of meaning. Jack waved it off, smiling.
No need, he said simply. Just live your life. That's thanks enough for me. In that moment, Emily realized how rare it was to meet someone who acted purely out of care for others without expectation of reward. As she left the hospital, Emily felt a deep sense of respect and admiration for the man who had saved her. She had survived the blizzard not because of luck alone, but because of the courage and selflessness of Jack Thompson. His actions had changed her life forever, not only saving her from death, but teaching her about humility, bravery, and the quiet power of doing the right thing. Emily knew she would never forget him, nor the lessons she had learned from her near-death experience in the storm. A few days after Emily Harper left the hospital, life began to settle back into its familiar rhythm for both her and Jack Thompson. Though neither of them would ever be quite the same, Emily had returned home to her family's estate, a sprawling property that covered miles of Montana land. She had always known her family was wealthy, but in the quiet days after the blizzard, she began to think more deeply about what that wealth really meant and how it could not protect her from the dangers of nature. Jack, meanwhile, returned to his ranch, checking his cattle and repairing fences, doing the same work he had always done, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. One morning, Jack received a call from Emily's father, Mr. Harper, requesting a meeting. Curious and a little nervous, Jack drove down the snow-covered roads toward the Harper estate. He had expected a simple thank you or perhaps a small gesture of gratitude, nothing more. When he arrived, however, he was led into a grand study filled with sunlight, polished wood, and shelves lined with books and awards. It was a far cry from the simple rooms of the small hospital and his modest ranch. Emily sat at a large desk with her parents, smiling warmly at Jack, who felt slightly out of place in the opulent surroundings. "Jack," Mr. Harper began, his voice calm but serious, "we cannot thank you enough for what you did. You saved our daughter's life, and words are not enough to express our gratitude." Jack nodded, scratching the back of his neck, feeling awkward in the grandeur of the house. "I just did what anyone would do," he said simply. "I didn't do it for thanks or money. I just saw life in danger and acted." Emily's mother, Mrs. Harper, smiled at him softly, sensing his humility. "We understand," she said. "But you need to know the full story about our family and about Emily so you understand the significance of what you did." Jack leaned back slightly, listening carefully as Mr. Harper began to explain. Emily was not just a young girl living in a wealthy family. She was the sole heir to a fortune that spanned nearly half the state. The Harpers owned vast amounts of land, businesses, and investments, much of which Emily would inherit in the future. Jack's eyes widened slightly. He had known her as a vulnerable young girl lost in a blizzard, and now he realized that the life he had saved was one of enormous consequence, not just to a family, but to an entire state. Emily remained quiet, watching Jack's reaction closely. She had never mentioned her wealth during their time together because it had never mattered in the snowstorm. She had needed Jack's help, and he had given it without question or expectation. Seeing him now, she realized how unusual it was for someone to act purely out of kindness, without any thought of reward. "Jack," she said softly, "I never expected you to know who I was, and it doesn't matter to me." You saved me, and that's all that counts. Jack looked at her, a mix of surprise and humility on his face. I did what I had to do, he said again. I don't need to know about your land or your money. I just did what was right. Despite his modesty, the revelation of Emily's wealth quickly began to spread through the Harper estate. Staff members, family friends, and even local media became aware that the rancher who had saved Emily Harper was a man of humble means, yet his actions had touched someone who would one day hold immense influence. Harper insisted on showing Jack some of the properties he could potentially be involved with, including ranches, conservation lands, and other holdings. Jack listened politely, but politely declined any offers. He had never been interested in wealth or status, and the idea of trading his quiet ranch life for luxury felt wrong. Emily, however, saw the world differently now. She realized that Jack's courage and selflessness had saved not just her life, but the future of all the projects she would one day lead. The thought that her inheritance and responsibilities were intact because a stranger had risked everything to save her struck her deeply. She began to see Jack in a new light, not just as a rescuer, but as someone with values and integrity that money could never buy. She wanted to ensure he was recognized in a meaningful way, though she knew he would resist. Over the next few days, Jack visited the Harper estate several times, helping Emily with small tasks, offering advice, and simply keeping her company. Each visit reminded him that life could be unpredictable and that human connections were often more important than possessions or status. He shared stories from his ranch about the winters, the animals, and the challenges of surviving in a harsh environment. Emily listened with fascination, realizing that courage, humility, and resilience often came from those who had faced life's trials without privilege or protection. One afternoon, Jack was invited to walk the family's lands with Emily. Snow still lingered in patches, and the mountains rose majestically in the distance. As they walked, Emily explained some of the projects her family was managing: conservation efforts, cattle operations, and local community programs. Jack nodded thoughtfully, impressed by the scale of responsibility she would inherit. You've got a lot to take care of, he said. But remember, it's not just about land or money. It's about people, too. Help the people, and everything else will follow. Emily smiled, realizing that the wisdom of someone who had lived a simple life could be just as valuable as all the riches in the world. Jack's humility continued to impress Emily's parents. They respected his refusal to accept material rewards, and they were struck by how natural he was in every situation. Unlike many who had met their family before, Jack did not act differently because of their wealth or influence. He treated Emily and her family with the same respect and honesty he showed to everyone on his ranch. The Harpers realized that he was a rare kind of person, someone who had acted out of pure kindness, without thinking of consequences or benefits for himself. Despite the revelation of Emily's wealth, Jack remained grounded. He returned to his ranch after each visit, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and living the life he had always known. Yet a quiet sense of pride began to grow in him, not because of money or status, but because he had made a difference. He realized that a single act of courage could ripple through lives in ways he had never imagined. Emily's recovery and her family's gratitude reminded him that kindness and bravery were worth more than any treasure. Emily, too, had changed. She began to understand the importance of humility and empathy. She saw how Jack's simple act of saving her had far-reaching consequences, and she realized that wealth and power were meaningless without courage and compassion. She promised herself that she would honor the life she had been given by making choices that reflected these values. Jack had shown her what it meant to act selflessly, and she intended to carry that lesson into her future, both as a member of her family and as a person in the world. As the days passed, Emily invited Jack to more meetings and walks across the estate, seeking his advice on managing her future responsibilities. Jack offered guidance with gentle honesty, always emphasizing the importance of people, integrity, and courage over profit and power. Emily appreciated his insight, knowing that his life experiences had taught him lessons that money could never buy. Their conversations grew deeper, touching on life, responsibility, and the true meaning of helping others. The revelation of Emily's wealth also brought new attention to Jack. Friends, neighbors, and even local media began to recognize him not just as a rancher, but as the man who had saved the girl who owned half the state. Jack felt uncomfortable with the attention but accepted it with quiet grace. He did not seek praise or reward, he only hoped that Emily's life would continue safely and successfully. Yet, he could not deny a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his actions had not only saved a life but had also inspired others to think about bravery, kindness, and selflessness. By the time Part 3 draws to a close, Jack and Emily's relationship had grown into one of mutual respect and admiration. Emily recognized that true wealth lay not in money or land but in courage, humility, and selfless action. Jack understood that even a simple life could have a profound impact on the world around him. The blizzard that had brought them together had not only saved a life, but had created a bond between two people from entirely different worlds. A bond built on trust, respect, and the quiet heroism of a man who acted because it was right, not because it would benefit him. After the revelation about Emily Harper's wealth and influence, Jack Thompson's life began to change in ways he had never expected. Word of his heroism had spread through the small town, and soon people from all over the state wanted to meet the man who had saved the girl who owned nearly half of Montana's land. Jack, who had spent his entire life on his modest ranch caring for cattle and repairing fences, was suddenly the center of attention. Yet, despite the sudden recognition, Jack remained the same humble man he had always been. He did not seek fame, and he did not let the attention change how he lived his life. Emily, now fully recovered, insisted that Jack accompany her to some local events and community gatherings. She wanted him to be recognized, but more importantly, she wanted others to understand the courage and selflessness that had saved her life. Jack was reluctant at first, feeling uncomfortable in the spotlight. He was used to the quiet rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the long walks through snow-covered fields, and the simple satisfaction of work done well. Public attention, media interviews, and handshakes with strangers were foreign to him. Still, Emily's insistence and gentle encouragement convinced him to participate, and slowly, he began to see the value in sharing his story. The local newspaper was the first to run the story, highlighting not only the drama of the blizzard but also the twist of fate. A simple rancher had saved the life of a girl with immense wealth and influence. The article described Jack's bravery, his humility, and his refusal to accept rewards, painting him as a true hero. The community was inspired by his actions, and soon letters and messages of gratitude arrived at his ranch. Farmers, neighbors, and even strangers wrote to tell him how his story had touched their hearts. Jack read each letter carefully, feeling a quiet pride, though he never bragged about his actions. Emily also introduced Jack to her family friends, local officials, and leaders of philanthropic projects. They wanted to show their appreciation for his courage and to offer him opportunities he had never imagined. Invitations to charity events, conservation projects, and ranching conferences began to pour in. Jack listened politely to every offer, but most of the time he declined. He did not want to leave his cattle, his land, or the simple life he had built with his own hands. Yet he began to realize that his actions could inspire others and that his story could make a difference beyond the immediate rescue. One morning, Emily invited Jack to visit a conservation project she and her family were managing. Vast stretches of prairie and mountain land were being restored to protect wildlife and preserve the environment. Jack walked alongside her, observing the careful planning and dedication involved. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "It's amazing to see how much good can come from people working together." Emily smiled.
"It's all about caring, Jack," she said. "You showed me what true caring means."
"You acted when it mattered most, and that courage inspires everyone around you." Jack nodded, understanding that his simple act of bravery had created ripples far beyond what he had ever imagined. As Jack became more involved in these projects, he noticed that his presence alone seemed to inspire others. People respected him not for his knowledge of wealth or business, but for his character. He spoke simply, honestly, and with kindness, sharing stories from his ranching life and offering advice based on experience rather than money or power. Emily often remarked that Jack had a way of connecting with people that was rare and meaningful. He did not judge anyone, and he treated everyone with equal respect. The community began to see him as a symbol of humility and courage, a man who had acted selflessly when it mattered most. Despite the growing recognition, Jack remained grounded. He returned to his ranch each day, checking on his cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the land he loved. The media sometimes called to interview him, and people occasionally visited the ranch, but Jack never let it disrupt his routine. He valued the quiet, honest work that had defined his life long before fame arrived. Yet, he could not ignore the fact that his actions had opened new doors for him, for Emily, and for the community. The blizzard that had brought them together had also created opportunities for positive change that neither of them could have anticipated.
Emily, grateful for Jack's guidance, began to involve him in her philanthropic efforts more actively. They worked together to create programs for rural families affected by harsh winters, providing supplies, education, and support to those in need.
Jack's first-hand knowledge of the challenges of rural life made him an invaluable advisor, and Emily respected his insights deeply. She realized that courage and compassion were not just abstract ideas. They were qualities that could transform lives when applied with action and care. Over time, Jack noticed subtle changes in himself as well. While he still loved the quiet rhythms of ranch life, he began to understand the broader impact of his actions. Saving Emily had been a single moment of bravery, but it had inspired hope, trust, and generosity in ways he could never have predicted. He realized that heroism was not about recognition or reward. It was about making the choice to act when it mattered most. That choice had brought him into a world of new possibilities, and he embraced it without losing sight of who he was. The media continued to follow the story, highlighting both Emily's recovery and Jack's humble nature. Articles praised his courage, his honesty, and his refusal to be swayed by wealth or fame. Jack read these articles with quiet amusement, never fully understanding the admiration that others felt for him. To him, he had simply done what any decent person would do. Yet he could not deny the satisfaction he felt in knowing that his actions had inspired others, and that the story of a single life saved could touch so many hearts. Emily also used her influence to honor Jack in meaningful ways. She created a small scholarship fund in his name to support rural children interested in agriculture and conservation. She invited him to speak at local schools and community events, where his story of courage and humility resonated deeply. Jack initially felt nervous, but as he spoke, he realized that sharing his experiences could teach valuable lessons about bravery, compassion, and responsibility. The audience listened intently, inspired by a man who had acted selflessly without expectation of reward. Jack's involvement in these projects gradually built a lasting legacy. People began to see him not just as a rancher, but as a symbol of courage and kindness. Emily often reminded him that his actions had far-reaching consequences and that the life he had saved had become a story of hope, inspiration, and connection. Jack accepted this truth quietly, understanding that his heroism had created opportunities for growth, learning, and positive change for many people, including himself. Despite all the attention, Jack never lost sight of his roots. He remained devoted to his ranch, to the land he loved, and to the simple, honest life he had always valued. The cattle still needed care, fences still required repair, and the mountains still held the quiet majesty that had shaped him. Jack understood that heroism and humility could coexist, and that even as the world celebrated him, his heart remained firmly grounded in the values that had guided him all his life. By the end of Part 4, Jack Thompson had become more than just a local hero. He was a figure of inspiration admired not for wealth or power, but for his courage, integrity, and selfless action. Emily Harper had recovered fully and had embraced her responsibility with new understanding, guided by the example Jack had set. Together, they had begun to transform their community, demonstrating that acts of bravery, compassion, and kindness could ripple far beyond the moment in which they occurred. The blizzard, which had once seemed like a threat, had become the catalyst for lasting change, creating a bond between two people from very different worlds and showing the world the quiet power of a life lived with courage and humility. Months had passed since the blizzard, and the story of Jack Thompson and Emily Harper had become well known across Montana. Newspapers and television reports continued to tell the tale of the humble rancher who had saved the life of the girl who owned nearly half the state. Yet for Jack, life remained largely unchanged. He still rose with the sun, tended to his cattle, repaired fences, and walked the snow-covered fields of his ranch. The difference now was not in his routine, but in the quiet pride he carried in his heart. He had saved a life, yes, but he had also formed a bond that would shape the future in ways he had never expected.
Emily, fully recovered and brimming with energy, often visited Jack on the ranch. Each time she arrived, she brought ideas, plans, and a determination to make a difference. But she also brought laughter, warmth, and a sense of companionship that Jack had not realized he had missed. Together they walked through the fields, checked the cattle, and even shared small meals in the modest ranch kitchen. Emily listened intently as Jack spoke about his experiences, learning about the challenges of ranch life, the harsh winters, and the lessons he had learned from the mountains. She admired his resilience, his humility, and the deep respect he had for life in all its forms. Jack, in turn, listened to Emily's stories about her family, the land she would inherit, and the projects she wanted to develop. She spoke of schools, conservation efforts, and community programs, all designed to improve the lives of those who lived in rural areas. Jack offered his advice, sharing insights he had gained from years of working the land and observing human nature. He spoke simply but wisely, emphasizing the importance of patience, observation, and treating people with respect. Emily valued his guidance, knowing that Jack's life experience gave him a perspective that money and education could never provide. As the months went by, Jack and Emily worked together on a number of community projects. They organized winter safety programs for rural families, ensuring that people had proper supplies, heating, and support to survive harsh conditions. Jack taught survival techniques such as how to prepare for blizzards, how to care for livestock in extreme weather, and how to recognize warning signs of danger. Emily coordinated resources, funding, and volunteers while also learning firsthand the challenges and rewards of helping others directly. Their teamwork was seamless, built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared understanding of what truly mattered. The townspeople who had once only known Jack as a quiet rancher began to see him in a new light. They admired not only his bravery in the blizzard but also his continued dedication to helping others. Parents brought their children to meet him, eager for them to learn lessons about courage, kindness, and responsibility. Farmers sought his advice on handling emergencies, and young adults looked to him as a role model of humility and selflessness. Jack never asked for recognition, but he could not help feeling a quiet satisfaction in seeing the impact of his actions ripple through the community. Emily's family also began to recognize the depth of Jack's character. They appreciated not only the courage he had shown during the blizzard, but also his consistent humility, his willingness to share knowledge, and his ability to inspire others without seeking reward. They began to involve him in charitable projects and community initiatives, though always respecting his simple lifestyle. Jack accepted their invitations sparingly, preferring to remain rooted in the ranch that had shaped him, but he was pleased to see that his guidance could make a difference in the lives of so many people. Through it all, Jack and Emily developed a friendship built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences. They laughed together over small mistakes and setbacks, celebrated successes, and supported each other through challenges. Emily learned the value of humility, the importance of acting with courage when it mattered most, and the power of selfless action. Jack, in turn, found joy in sharing his knowledge, witnessing the growth of a young woman whose life had been saved by his quick thinking, and seeing the impact that one act of kindness could have on an entire community. One crisp winter morning, Emily and Jack stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out at the snow-covered mountains in the distance. The sunlight reflected off the white peaks, and the air was cold but invigorating. Emily turned to Jack, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, Jack," she said softly, "I think what you did that day in the blizzard changed more than just my life. It changed mine, yes, but it also changed so many others. You showed me what courage looks like, and you've helped me understand what it means to care for people, not just land or money." Jack smiled quietly, a warmth in his eyes. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "I just knew someone needed help, and I did what I could, but I'm glad to see that it made a difference beyond that moment." "That's all anyone can hope for." Emily nodded, realizing that his modesty was part of what made him extraordinary. She had witnessed firsthand that true heroism often came without fanfare, recognition, or reward, and that those who acted selflessly often left the deepest mark on the world. Together, they began planning long-term projects to benefit the local community. Emily's wealth and resources provided the means to implement programs, while Jack's experience and practical knowledge ensured that the projects were realistic, sustainable,
and effective. They established winter shelters for isolated families, organized workshops on safe ranching practices, and created educational programs for children interested in agriculture and conservation. Their combined efforts brought tangible improvements to the community, strengthening the bond between residents and demonstrating the value of courage, planning, and compassion. The media continued to follow their work, reporting not only on the blizzard rescue but also on the ongoing initiatives they had undertaken together. Jack remained uncomfortable with the attention but accepted it with quiet grace, knowing that the publicity could inspire others to act with courage and kindness in their own lives. Emily often reminded him that recognition was not the goal, but that the story of their partnership could encourage positive change in the world. Jack agreed, realizing that his life, simple as it was, had become a source of inspiration far beyond what he had ever imagined. Over time, Jack and Emily's friendship deepened into a bond that went beyond heroism and gratitude. They shared stories, experiences, and insights, learning from one another and growing together. Jack taught Emily patience, resilience, and the value of hard work, while Emily reminded Jack of the power of vision, planning, and generosity. Together, they demonstrated that courage, humility, and selflessness could create lasting change both in individual lives and in the broader community. By the end of the year, the story of Jack and Emily had become a symbol of hope, kindness, and integrity. People spoke of the rancher who had faced a deadly blizzard to save a life, and the young woman who had used her influence to improve the lives of others. Jack continued his daily life on the ranch, unchanged in routine but transformed in understanding, while Emily embraced her responsibilities with new wisdom and humility. The friendship they had formed, born from a moment of crisis, had grown into a lifelong connection rooted in respect, admiration, and shared purpose. One winter evening, as the sun set over the mountains and the ranch lay quiet beneath a blanket of snow, Emily and Jack sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. "You know," Emily said, breaking the silence, "I will never forget that day, Jack. You saved my life, and in doing so, you changed everything. Not just for me, but for so many people. And you've done it without ever asking for anything in return." Jack shook his head, smiling softly. "I didn't do it for thanks or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." "That's all anyone can do." Emily nodded, understanding completely. In that moment, they both knew that the blizzard had been more than just a dangerous storm. It had been the beginning of a story about courage, compassion, and the quiet power of one person to make a difference. Years later, people would continue to speak of Jack Thompson and Emily Harper. The story of the rancher who had saved a girl from a deadly blizzard would be remembered not for fame or fortune, but for the lessons it taught that courage is measured by action, not words. That kindness can ripple far beyond the moment it is given, and that humility and selflessness are sometimes the greatest forms of heroism. Jack returned to his ranch. Emily continued her work with wisdom and empathy, and together they left a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The blizzard had tested courage and strength, but it had also revealed the beauty of human connection. A simple act of bravery had blossomed into a story of friendship, service, and the enduring power of doing what is right. And in the quiet Montana mountains, beneath the snow and the stars, Jack Thompson continued his life as a humble rancher, a man who had saved a life, shaped a community, and shown the world that true heroism often comes quietly, without fanfare, and with the purest intentions.